The clocks fell back today. I'm assuming everybody knows that. If you don't, then there's some useful information in this class, and you're also super out of touch. But yeah, the clocks fell back today. I didn't know it was going to happen, so I woke up and noticed it. And I think, I'm not sure, I didn't fact check this, but I do know that people die when the clocks jump forward because they get an hour less sleep. And then there's a statistically significant increase on that day in the amount of deaths by car accidents, and I think also some other stuff too. I don't know, the numbers aren't huge, but there's some dozens of additional deaths every year when the clock jumps forward for daylight savings time. People get an hour less sleep because they lose an hour, and that means people are driving when they're more tired, and that means they're more prone to have a heart attack or get into an accident. So they've had a resolution on the books or on the ballot for years now. They've been trying to get it approved that they can stop daylight savings time. And I recall reading that daylight savings time, in fact, had been voted out. But it happened, in the last few months, and so their clocks had to fall back one more time. So now we gained an hour, so they fell back, which would give you an extra hour of sleep. And so I don't think we're going to be doing daylight savings time whenever it is, come April of next year. I think this was it. I didn't bother fact checking that, so I'm not 100% sure, but I have been, occasionally over the years reading up on it, and I do recall reading that it had been, in fact, voted in. So, I guess, in some ways, although we gained an hour, we lost an hour of sunlight today. Because you gain an hour, it gets, it wasn't getting light out until like 7 or something like that in the morning. But now they'll get lighter an hour earlier. So you get an hour of extra sunshine on the front end, but it gets dark. It's going to start getting dark like around 4:45 it gets down to. Probably now it's about 5:10, and over the next month or two it'll work its way down about a minute a day, and by the time we get to December 22nd, we'll be down to maybe 4:40, something like that. It gets dark at, which totally sucks. Who wants to get dark at 4:40? I like it when it gets dark at like 8:30. That's around June 22nd. The summer solstice is the longest day of the year. So it's getting darker earlier, and also it got cold. I mean, anywhere else in the country, we have fabulous weather, even now. But for me, I've got on a long sleeve shirt and a sweatshirt and a jacket and a scarf and a hat. Because it's probably, 55 out or something like that. And so, that's really cold. It's like the dead of winter for me. And so it's getting colder, and it's getting darker, and we're officially now, we always have a late summer in Southern California, but we're officially now in fall. There's no denying it. Even we get hot days, it's getting dark so early, it's getting cold at night, and so we are officially, at least for us, we're in fall. And people get more depressed. They get more depressed. I don't think there's more suicides around like right now. I think what happens is people get depressed, and then they get more suicides closer to spring. I think it's a misunderstanding. Again, I mean, I did fact check this. I just can't remember my fact checking of it. But they say that, people kill themselves over the holidays. That's actually false. But then they get depressed, and then that results in suicides a little later on, like late winter, early spring. People do get depressed when there's a lot of darkness out. That's for sure. They have to give light therapy to people. They go to Antarctica, during the wintertime when it's dark, 23 and a half hours a day or something. They have to give people light therapy. Otherwise, you get super depressed. If you look at, I think Japan has the highest suicide rate in the world, if I'm not mistaken. But there's some other kind of northern countries, and they suffer from high rates of suicide. It's speculated it's because of the long darkness that they have to suffer through. And there's a name for it. What is it? It's an acronym. Seasonal affective disorder. SAD, I think is what they call it. Right? Seasonal affective disorder. Yeah, so there's a name for it. It's called SAD. They came up with a sexy acronym that, you are sad, and it's called SAD. So that was, and so certainly it's a thing. And I myself find that I am more pensive and thoughtful, more internal, less external, more introverted, less extroverted, less interested in exercise, more interested in reading and studying. Winter, is like that for me every year. Even in a mild climate like Southern California, there's a marked cooling down and a marked increase in nighttime hours, and it overall has an effect of making me less enthusiastic to get out and go, and I get more quiet and introverted. Yeah. So I feel like today is the day that hit. Kartik is over tomorrow. So the month of Kartik is done, which means we're officially, in winter. We're in Margashir. It's like officially winter time. Winter's a little different in India. I mean, if you go in the north, if you go in the Himalayas, then winter gets downright frozen. And even the whole areas of northern India shut down, and no one can live there. Like the deity in Badrinath and in Kedarnath, they have to come down. And in Kedarnath, the deity goes down to Gupta Kedar, and then in Badrinath, the deity goes down to Joshimat. They travel south, just outside of Joshimat. But there's a certain elevation, and it just gets snowed in by, whatever it is, 10 feet of snow. And so everyone has to leave. You actually can't live there. It's impossible to live there. There are military bases up there. I believe they still, but I'm pretty sure it's right on the border of China. Indo-China kind of Cold War that's been brewing for 70 years. And so it's always, just about to pop off or just about to be some difficulty. So there's a ton of military bases up there. But the rest of the place just gets shut down. Some of our holy places, just no one can go up there. It opens up in May and it shuts down, and towards the end of October, and it's just done. You can't get in or out. But for most of India, winter is kind of a nice time, because you still get the strong sun. And the sun in India hits different than anywhere else in the world. Have you ever noticed this? It's debilitating in a way that no other sun I've ever experienced is debilitating. And I've been around. I've been to 43 countries. The sun in India is more debilitating than anywhere else I've ever been in the world. It might just be the water or other factors of health, but I do know that wheat grows in India in a period of 3 to 4 months, whereas everywhere else it takes 9 to 10 months. And I think it's because there's just this massive amount of sunshine. And it just, it's really powerful. So in the wintertime in India, the sun is less powerful, but it's still there. And so you still have really nice weather. It's quite pleasant. You feel like Delhi, as you kind of just your standard sort of North India, or, even like MP, like this, what would you call it? I won't call it the Midwest, but like sort of the bread basket, like the Midwestern states in the U.S., the Red Sea, what they call the Red Sea, or they call the flyover states. It's the heartland. So the heartland of India is really nice in the wintertime. Because the sun's still there, but it's just a whole lot more mild. So if you're looking at like, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, those places, it's quite nice. Would you agree? It's nice, right? It's a nice time. Yeah. And people get married. Starting tomorrow, the wedding season in India starts. Because there's 4 months you can't get married during the Chaturmas, the 4 months. And then that ends officially tomorrow, and Margashirsha starts. And so there's a ton of weddings because, people have been holding off on getting married for 4 months. And so there's a massive wedding season. A lot of times, if you have family in India or friends in India, you have to go to India during this time. You'll attend several weddings because they all get jumbled together. So you'll go to like several weddings in a row and make a quick trip over there or something like that. So anyway, I was thinking about all of that. So it gets dark earlier, the days are shorter, less sunshine, it's colder, people have seasonal affect or affective disorder, sad, they get depressed. That turns into an increase of suicides, in the early part of the next year. But it affects people now. The harvest season's done. And now the benefit of that harvest season, which is that you can survive through winter, has happened. Many places in the world, it just gets downright inhospitable, and it's freezing cold. And here, I feel like it's freezing cold, but I know that I'm just being weak because living in Southern California makes you weak. Just what it does. If you live elsewhere, and I have lived abroad during the winter season, and it toughens you up. But if you live here for long enough, no matter how tough you are, if you live here for long enough, you get weak. It's a weird phenomenon. If you go back to India in the middle of summertime, you'll be miserable. Or if you're from a cold place like Minnesota or northern Michigan, and you live with us down here for 5 or 10 years, you go back home, you're like, how did I ever live here? I can't. How does it work? So it's colder, and I'm less extroverted and more introverted and more thoughtful, and I want to read more and do less. I want to be less physical. And there's a whole shift that takes place that's largely out of my control. There are some things I can do to stave it off, but at least the feeling of it, that there's a pressure. Like if you go out maybe up to your like mid thighs, and a strong tide rolls in, it'll rip you right off your feet. But if you go out into the ocean in a really strong tide, but the water only goes up to, let's say, your lower calf, mid calf, you can stand out there. You'll feel it hit, but you can kind of lean into it, and it won't knock you over. Past a certain point, that water will just, it'll just rip you off your feet. There's nothing you can do about it. So I feel like our experience of winter in Southern California is mild enough. It's kind of like mid-calf. You could theoretically force yourself to go to the gym, force yourself to get up and do stuff, figure out your circadian rhythm, adjust everything, refuse to, become more thoughtful, stay as passionate as you ever were, and refuse to entertain sad, and you could maybe make it through. You'd feel it, but you might be able to tolerate it. But at least the energy shift, the seasonal shift. You're going to experience that. How much it affects you, that may depend on your individual constitution. That may depend on the severity of the external factors, a number of things, your community, a number of things. Your resolve, your physical robustness, your age. But at least you're going to feel it on some level. We all feel winter coming and affecting us on some level. And so I was thinking about this. And I thought of a verse in the Gita. So the verse is, Matra Sparsheshu to Kaunteya. Matra Sparsheshu. So, Matra Sparsheshu to Kaunteya. Up. Matra Sparshas to Kaunteya. Sparsheshu would be with regard to this. But so, Matra Sparshas. Sparsha means touch, from sprish. So it means touch. Matra means only. Only touch. But in this context, matra means material. Matra sparshas to kaunteya. So Krishna's talking to Arjuna, and he says, but material sensations, Shita, Ushna. Shita means cold and Ushna means heat. Shita, Ushna, Sukha, Dukkha, Daha. Material sensations give heat and cold, pleasure and pain. Sukha, Dukkha means pleasure and pain. Matra Sparshas to Kaunteya. Material sensations give rise to heat and cold, pleasure and pain. Agama, they come. Apayina, they go. Agama, apayino, anitya. They are temporary. They're not nitya, they're anitya. They're temporary. Nitya means eternal, anitya means temporary. Matra Sparshas to Kaunteya. Shita, Ushna, Sukha, Dukkha, Daha. Agama, apayino, anitya. So your sense perception, your these material sensations, they give heat and cold, pleasure and pain. They come and they go. And they're temporary. Tam tatikshasva. You must tolerate them. Krishna rarely speaks in the imperative in the Gita. The imperative is when you say you must do this. Like in English, you communicate this by tone. You'll say, close the door. That's the imperative because of how you said it. In Sanskrit, you can decline words and turn them into, or you can conjugate words, and turn them into the imperative. So, titikshasva means you must tolerate. Tam titikshasva bharata. You must tolerate this. So you must tolerate material sensations such as heat and cold, pleasure and pain. They come and they go. They're not permanent, and you must tolerate them. And I was thinking about this verse, which I think has a really broad applicability. If you're counseling someone, I just noticed Usha, who's a psychiatrist, and so I thought, if you're counseling someone with borderline personality disorder, then you have this dialectic therapeutic model, right? What do you call it? You have dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. And so DBT is essentially Buddhism for crazy people. a huge feature of dialectical behavioral therapy is you tell people not to take things so seriously and not to get so spun out if they have an urge or a sensation, and to be more dispassionate in the way they deal. You teach them to tolerate these sensations that come and go and not to get too wrapped up in them, because people with borderline personality disorder, they feel intense hatred and intense love at the same time, and it completely spins them out. And so the therapy for them, I think there's probably some psychotropics you give them, but along with the medication you give them, they have to learn to just really take how they feel a whole lot less seriously. And so it's essentially Buddhism, like a kind of a secularized form of Buddhism. As is this verse. This verse is very much, could be a part, you could actually use this verse in a DBT model. You could break out this verse and it would be totally in line with what you would find in the literature that you're supposed to guide people with. You don't have to be a devotee to appreciate this verse. And I think there's really two ways that, in other words, this is something that everyone needs to learn. Because if you get happy every time it's summer and then you get miserable every time it's winter, that sucks in terms of your productivity and your personal sense of well-being. Why would you want to be depressed for months and months a year? You would want to take more possession of your personal sense of well-being. You wouldn't want to just give that over to the weather. That's ridiculous. I'm happy when it's sunny out. I'm miserable when it rains out. Who would do such a thing? So everybody, and when I say everybody, I mean 7.5 billion people on the planet, can benefit by this verse irrespective of whether they believe in God or not. When you get to who believes in God, it's more like 6 billion people. But if you're just looking at, the broadest applicability of this verse does not require any belief in anything spiritual to appreciate. You live, people tend to get sad when it's cold out, when it's rainy out, the day gets shorter, it's depressing, and you have to learn how to not get so spun out when that happens. Not get so affected by that. You need to be a little more stoic. I mean, just if you want to be a parent or a teacher, or even if you want to have a job, you have to go to work. You don't want to go to work every single day you have to go to work. Nobody wants to go and work every single day they have work. Some days you feel a little sick or a little depressed, or you're tired from the night before, or you've got other stuff on your mind, and you just have to force yourself to go work. Right, Tootie? You don't want to go make donuts every single time you make donuts, right?
She does, I don't.
You might want to eat donuts, but you don't want to necessarily go out and sell them, right? If I was to say eating donuts, you might be like, all right, I can do that like 7 days a week, no problem. But as far as selling them goes, you don't want to sell donuts every single time you go out to sell donuts. And when you go out to engineer equipment for what? Prosthetics for eyes? What are you doing? Yeah, so you're developing equipment for cataract surgery. Right? It's such a noble profession. I mean, cataracts are amazing. In villages in India, you get a cataract, you're blind. But it's just a simple surgery. You cut a little bit, you pull it out, a little film that formed on your eye, and all of a sudden you can see. And we do these eye camps in different places in India, and people are coming in and they're blind. They've been blind for years. And you just sit them down and you do a little surgery on them and they walk out and they can see again. It's unbelievable. Such a noble profession. He develops medical equipment that's used in performing cataract surgeries. But you don't want to do that every single time you have to do work. There's no version of life where you don't ever have to push through sometimes to get something done. In many ways, most of what you learn in high school is useless information. If you don't get into engineering, like I never got into engineering, I have not used algebra ever. I've never used algebra. I took algebra, I took geometry, I took algebra 2, I did trig. I don't use any of that stuff ever. And if I did want to do something, there's calculators for it. I don't even use the calculators. The only thing I use is geometry, and I only use geometry when I'm being a full Shudra. If I'm doing hard manual labor, I got to figure out how many tiles to buy for a square floor, how many gallons of paint to buy. Then I have to start to do geometry and figure out a triangle and figure out the space of a triangle versus a circle and a square and do some simple multiplication to figure that stuff out. And then maybe if it's three-dimensional space, I also have to I have to cube it. Other than that, I never even use geometry. So much of what you learn in school, you never use. Arithmetic I use every day. Maybe some even like pre-algebra, fractions, sure, but not algebra. Everything above algebra I don't use. I'm sure you use it because you're an engineer. Rupanugapu is not an engineer. How often do you use algebra?
I'm an engineer, but I migrated to management, so I don't use it.
When's the last time you used algebra? Decades? Yeah. It's decades. Decades go by. You don't use it. And he's a PhD professor. He works at a university as a chair-holding professor. He's an academic, and he still doesn't use it. When's the last time you used algebra, Premanjana? She's a social worker. You don't remember, right? Yeah. What school does do is it teaches you how to work when you don't want to. How to put time in, how to put your nose to the grindstone, how to meet deadlines. It's valuable in that sense. It teaches you how to persevere, push forward, how to learn, how to quiet your mind, how to focus on something, assimilate it, make it your own. These are incredibly valuable skills. This verse also is indicating that. And so this verse has a broad applicability. It can work for 7.5 billion people. Macha sparshas tu kaunteya, shita ushna sukha dukkha daha, agama apaino anitya tangstatiksha svabharata. You must tolerate material senses. They give heat and cold, pleasure and pain. They come and they go. They're impermanent, and you simply have to learn to tolerate them in this world. The pushings of this world on you. And the classic example given in our extensive commentatorial tradition on this verse is that when it's summertime, you still have to go cook and work with fire. Even though it's hot out, you don't want to, you still got to build a fire and cook. And when it's wintertime, and it's cold out, you still got to go and take a bath. Now we try to get rid of this. We have air conditioning, so you're cooking in the wintertime and the heat feels good because you got your house so frosty. Or you're cooking in the summertime, but your house is so cold because of the air conditioning that you don't feel it at all. But if you don't have air conditioning and it's hot out and you have to cook, it's no joke. And I have a restaurant, so we have like a legitimate kitchen, not some little house kitchen or something like that. And it's rough. We turn on all the air conditioners, and it still gets hot in there in the summertime. And people complain. My cooks complain. I got the air conditioning on just on absolute max. I got multiple units going, and they're complaining because the heat in that kitchen, it gets oppressive. And then when it's wintertime, we just turn on the hot water. You're more likely to take a longer hot shower in the wintertime. Take a hot shower to warm up in the wintertime. But if you don't have hot water and you're bathing in a lake or a stream or a river, taking bath in the wintertime sucks. It really sucks. Now, there is a small caveat there. If you're bathing in a well with well water and it's really cold out, there's this cool phenomenon where the well water stays warmer than the outside air and it feels lukewarm. And so if you get up early enough and it's cold out enough and you're working from a well, then it's not so bad. I remember one time I was in Badrinath though, and I thought it's not going to be that cold. So I got up really early. I got up like 3 to take my bath, thinking, okay, I'll take a nice lukewarm bath. It's freezing out, so cold. And everybody else was just using the blankets that were provided at the Dharmashala that we were staying at. And so they all got bed bugs. But I didn't use the blankets provided by the Dharmashala. I just used my chutter. And so I froze all night long, but I didn't get any bed bug bites. And so I was very, very light sleeping because it was just so cold out, so oppressively cold out. So anyway, I went to go take bath thinking I'll warm up with a bath because I know this trick because it works everywhere I've ever been. In India, you take the nice warm well bath super early in the morning. It's not that bad. But the well, it wasn't a well, it was a pump coming off the Ganga. So I went to pump myself a bucket of water. It was like the coldest water I'd ever felt in my life because the movement of the Ganga allows it to be like frozen, but at the same time it still moves. And so it was just so unbelievably cold. And then the bucket was really small. And so I poured the bucket on me and it wasn't near enough to give me a bath. So I had to go and draw another bucket of water. And I was like, I had to get 3 buckets of water, and in between, I was practically hypothermic by the time the whole thing was done. Anyway, the classic example given is you got to take your bath when it's winter, and you got to cook when it's summer out. Sometimes the temperature, the season doesn't favor what you want to do, but you still have to do your activities of daily living. You still got to do your activities of daily living. And so this verse has value for everybody. Material sensations give rise to heat and cold, pleasure and pain, happiness and distress. It comes and it goes, and the only solution is to become stoic and to learn to tolerate it and still do what needs to be done. And you have to learn some fortitude, whether you learn that from your family or you learn that in school. You have to learn a little bit of perseverance, a little bit of fortitude, and you have to be able to put your nose to the grindstone and get stuff done and put work in. Any productive life, any life of meaning requires that. Therefore, this verse is pre-theistic. It's not at all necessarily linked to a belief in a higher power or anything like that. I think there's really 2 ways of dealing with this existential dilemma, that we live in an unfavorable world, that, the tide rolls in. Hey, can you ask him to just, thank you. The tide rolls in and goes out, and it pulls on you, pushes on you, and you have to stay nimble and pivot and move and flex, and at the same also stay anchored. One way of dealing with this verse. It's going to happen automatically. The other way is that there's a cause of your suffering. There's a cause, and if you rout out the cause, your suffering will go away. In Buddhism, the cause of suffering is Rupanugaji, you know? The Sanskrit word in Buddhism for what causes suffering? Trishna. Thirst. And of course, Krishna has his own term he uses that we oftentimes use. What's the cause of suffering in our tradition, Rupanugaji? One word, like Trishna, but starts with a K? Calm. So whether you're Hindu or Buddhist, there's a kind of a standard Eastern idea that your suffering is caused by your desire. And if you rout out your desire, you will rout out your suffering. If you give up expectations, if you give up material desire, if you give up attachment, then to the extent you give up your attachment, you won't be affected. Like for instance, let's say you love somebody very dearly and they ignore you. How do you feel? How does it feel to be ignored by someone you love dearly? It feels bad, right? Because you've developed an expectation for how they'll treat you. You have an attachment to being treated by them in a certain way. You have a desire that they treat in a certain way. That you allow them to affect your oxytocin levels and your dopamine levels. And then when you're close to them, you feel happy, biochemically happy. And when you're away from them, you feel sad. We learn this when we're very, very young. It has great value when you're young because it creates attachment for your early attachment figures who normally nourish you and give you life and are responsible for you not dying. Other animals, like a baby cow just comes out of its mother's womb and just immediately starts walking around and eating grass. Human beings aren't like that. For 6 months, you practically can't even roll over, and you're utterly dependent on your family. For years, you'll die if they abandon you. We require an incredible amount of care from early attachment figures, and we have a psychology which allows for that, where we start to link our neurotransmitter levels to the people that we're close to, and they uplift us like a drug. Was it selective? Say it again, loud. SSRI. It's like a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It's like a person can be an SSRI for you. We're just being with them raises your serotonin levels, modulates them nicely and keeps them steady, increases dopamine activity, and increases oxytocin. It's incredible, actually. We're made for this because we're made to live in groups. But anyway, so now you got somebody who you love and they ignore you and you feel sad. And it's not just like it's a serious thing. It's an actually biochemical reaction. But then if you don't care about somebody and they ignore you, it doesn't affect you at all. So you could give up attachment to people. You could give up love for people and attachment to people and expectations of people. And by doing so, you can largely end your suffering because you're no longer as affected by other people as you would be normally. That's one way to deal with it. Of course, the downside of that is you miss out on loving relationships and kind of go against our very nature as human beings. So there's a little sweet spot in there where you walk that razor's edge, where you care but not too much. This is talked about by poets. I'm thinking of one in particular. Rudyard Kipling says, "If all men count with you, but none too much. If you can walk with kings, nor lose the common touch. If you can see the truths you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken, and stoop to build them up with worn out tools." This idea of walking that razor's edge where you care, but not so much that it takes you away from your core value system. And really that's the magic of life. To have meaningful relationships, but meaningful relationships where you don't compromise your core value system. You don't give up the really important stuff. You have a higher thing that you're attached to. You have a higher principle or value system that you're attached to. And that higher value system allows you to then regulate your lower level attachments, and you can give them up or take them on depending on if they help you with your overall goal, whatever that might be. So anyway, one way of dealing with seasonal affective disorder, the seasonal depression that you get in the wintertime, is to try to rout out any expectation from anyone or anything such that you become completely insulated and you carry sunshine in your pocket wherever you go and nothing external ever affects you. I think that that is a utopian ideal that is impossible to actually practice, and therefore you really have two models which are given in our sacred texts. One of them is to, as far as possible, give up unrealistic expectations, to be more selective in the people you depend on, to have a core set of values you won't give up for anybody. That's the first one. The second one is to just learn that being in this world is a little bit of up and down, to steady yourself for it. If you walk out into the ocean, into the tide, not aware it's going to try to blow you over, you'll just get knocked off your feet. But if you walk out there and you know it's coming in, you can steady yourself, take a staggered stance and kind of lean into it. And you can tolerate a bit of water coming your way without getting knocked over. You can also, at a certain point, when the water's too much, you can jump into it and flow with it and go with it and realize I just have to move with this. I can't fight this. And so that's what this verse is speaking about. To some extent, the external world acts on you in ways that you truly cannot stop. Old age, disease, death. The seasons are a mini version of that. A mini version of our lack of control in this world. And as we give up expectations and become more attached to Krishna and let go of this world, we still need to do this. Just straight tolerance. Straight tolerance. Everyone benefits by it. Then, on top of the straight tolerance, if you have some kind of like a spiritual higher value, then as you get attached to that, you really in some ways like step out of this world. And so that would be where religion or spirituality really has something that goes along with this that you wouldn't get from just a straight stoicism. Just a straight, hey, just tolerate this. Don't take it so seriously. As devotees or members of any spiritual tradition, there's this extra feature, this extra thing that we have. And that's reflected in the next verse. Yam hi na vyatayanti vyatayantiete purusham purusharshava samaduka sukham dhiram somritvaya kalpate. Tam na vyatayanti ete. If you don't tremble, vyat means to tremble. So vyatayanti. If for those who do not tremble in the face of all these difficulties, they're not disturbed by the heat and cold, pleasure, pain. They do their job anyway. You persevere. You don't let this completely knock you off your feet. You stay the course. For those people, Samaduka Sukham Dhiram. And they're steady, they're equipoised, they're Samaduka Sukham. They are the kind of people who are equal whether it's good or bad. We've all met people like this, where when things are good, they're steady. When things are bad, they're steady. They try not to get too elated when things go good. Things go good, and not because of low self-esteem and some sort of like fundamental depression or negativity. But things are going good, and people are like, yeah, they're going good today. We'll see how they are tomorrow. I'm not going to get too caught up in it, because this isn't my first rodeo. I've seen things, they go up, they go down. I'm just going to stay steady. That's sama sukha dukkha, the kind of people who are the same. Sama means same. So where you get the English word same from. Sama sukha dukkha. They're the same in happiness and distress. Dhiram, they're thoughtful. Dhira literally means thoughtful, from D, which means conscious. So Dhira means a thoughtful person. A deep, thoughtful person. They're thoughtful. They're the same whether it's good or bad. Sa amritatvaya kalpate. Those people are fit for transcendence. Mrita means death. Amrita means non-death. It's used in Sanskrit to mean transcendence. Amritatvaya, for transcendence. Kalpate. That person's fit for transcendence. So material sensations, heat and cold, pleasure and pain, it comes and it goes with the summer and the winter, with the day and the night. You can't control it. What can you do? You can just learn to tolerate it. Tams tatikshasva bharata. You got to tolerate it. How do you tolerate it? Because you know it's agama apayana. It's coming and it's going. It's anitya. It's temporary. It's temporary. Now, is it merely that you're a Stoic just for Stoicism's sake? I think there's benefit in that. You can make an argument, an ethical argument, that this world naturally has suffering within it. Therefore, the best thing you can do to maintain some peace is to go beyond pleasure into true happiness, learn to be peaceful, realize that peace is a prerequisite for true happiness, that sensual pleasure does not equate to happiness because it has a tendency to come and go. Therefore, even as an atheist, you should just be Zen. You shouldn't get too caught up in stuff. And that's going to yield more longevity, a more deeper and more profound level of happiness. And then when you die, it's all over. You can make an argument for that. You can make an argument for that. Where spiritualists depart or really take off and really show themselves to be a phenomenon unto themselves, they have something special to give the world, is that in addition to that stoicism for its own sake, stoicism just to make you suffer less, stoicism because it's the best way to respond to this crazy, chaotic world in which we live, is to be a little internal, to be a little self-sustaining. But then there's this other point Krishna makes, which is that if you're able to stay steady in this, nahi vyatayanti yete, if you're able to not tremble in this, purusha purushashaba, samaduka sukham dhiram, and you're thoughtful and you're steady in happiness and pain, then amritat vaya kalpate, then you become fit, you become qualified for transcendence. And so it's interesting. It's almost like you could imagine that you went to an airport, and there were two things you could do at the airport. You could either A, take a flight somewhere, or B, you could use the bathroom. Now, whether or not you want to fly somewhere or you want to use the bathroom, you both have to drive on the freeway to the airport. Everyone in the world has to drive to the airport. Everyone should learn how to be stoic. Everybody should just realize, hey, wait a second, there's nothing I can do about winter rolling in. There's nothing I can do about it getting colder. There's nothing I can do about the days getting shorter. There's nothing I can do about my loved ones eventually dying. There's nothing I can do that I don't control this world, that my body's going to get old on me, that I'm going to get disease, I'm going to lose people. There's nothing I can do about that. And so I'm going to steady myself that that's part of life. And I'm not going to get so elated when good things happen, because I know to the extent I get elated, cheaply elated, when things go my way, not necessarily because I did anything. Things go your way just because, like if it's sunny out, I'm going to be happy. You didn't do anything to make it sunny out. It's just sunny X amount of days of the year. And if you're like, I'm going to be miserable when it's raining out, you didn't do anything to make it miserable. It's just happening on its own. And so, sometimes we become cheaply elated when things go our way, even though we didn't really do anything to make them go our way. It just so happened the coin flipped and it came up heads. We're like, oh my God, yeah, yeah. But it's like it could have just easily come up tails. And the more you play that Russian roulette, the more likely you are to get hit. It's just statistics, statistical probability. So we get all elated when things go our way without even really figuring out if we did anything to make them go our way. We try to take credit for stuff we didn't do, a lot. And then when things don't go our way, then we have to suffer to the exact extent we took that cheap pleasure, we got to take that cheap pain. Everybody should learn to get over this. And then for devotees, we have another level. And our other level is that we're getting over these material things to free ourselves up so we can start to really think about Krishna. We're getting over the material world. We're being stoic. We're being detached. We're letting go of some expectations. We're not being so dependent on others. We're being more insular. Not in a way which is dissociative, not in a way which is antisocial, but in a way which realistically assesses the situation that we're in and looks at what we should expect from the material world and what we shouldn't expect from it. We cultivate that to free us up so when we get to the airport, we're qualified to get on the plane and really experience divinity. It's interesting, but this lessening of the tie that you have to the material world, lessening of how addicted you are to material pleasure, it benefits everybody. Even if you just want to go to the airport to use the bathroom, it's still a better way to go. You got to take that path anyway, just to get there. But that same path is a big chunk of your journey to get on the airplane. You have to add some stuff, and so Krishna makes it's like two nice verses. The first verse is applicable to everybody, and the second verse points out that by doing this, it's not merely just for its own sake, to make the best use of a bad bargain, but it actually frees you up to think more deeply about Krishna. Because in some ways Krishna, this is the final point I'll make, in some ways Krishna is a very abstract value. Like I said before, you don't want to be so addicted to your relationships that you give up your core values for them. So we have core values. Vegetarian, celibacy or monogamy, sobriety. We have our value system. Chanting japa, coming to see the deity, doing service. We have a value system. These are things, principles that we stand for. Truth, honor, loyalty, devotion, a practical, manifested devotion. Principles of purity. These are ideals, and then we have these ideals, and then when we have relationships with other people, or relationships with a job, or relationships, we liaise with other entities and other situations, but we always do it in a way which isn't going to take away from our core values. And when it does, we have to say, hey, I'm not going to do that. Like, for instance, Rupanuga Prabhu makes a great living as a professor. If they had some kind of an event where he was required to take his students to McDonald's and buy them all food at McDonald's, and that, like the people in his university that he's been working at for many, many years said to him, you must do this. This is part of your job description. What would you do, Rupanuga? You'd do a discrimination lawsuit and get super rich. That's what you do. But you, that's what you do. A religious discrimination lawsuit because you're a protected class and they're asking you to do something that you haven't signed up for, that's outside of your scope of your work that they can reasonably ask you to do. But he would give up his job. He would never sacrifice his values just to please his liege lords that he works for that sign his check. He's not going to do that. In some ways, Krishna is just the ultimate abstract value. And the more you're not addicted to your senses, the more you can deeply attach yourself to higher things, which most people can't reach up and grab. They're too high for them. But the more you're detached from this world, the higher you can jump. And the bigger, higher fruit you can grab a hold of. And Krishna is the ultimate high-hanging fruit. I can make another argument that Krishna is also everywhere at all moments. You can see him everywhere. But today I'm making this point, that your freedom from materialism empowers you to leap up and touch something divine. To touch something higher. To experience something higher. Brahma Sparsha, Krishna says at one point. You're not touching the material thing, so what can you do? You can do Brahma Sparsha. You can touch Brahman. You can touch something higher. Because your freedom, you have this almost trampoline-like relationship with the world, where you're not tethered to it as much. And you can leap off the material world, you can reach up, and you can grab a hold of abstract things. In the beginning, it's principles like purity and depth and devotion, but eventually becomes the object of your devotion, and you grab a hold of Krishna's feet. And so what starts out as good advice even for the atheist becomes even better advice for the Buddhist. Even better advice for the devotee. Because the same fundamental lessons enable you to leap as high as you want to go, eventually leaping up and grabbing a hold of Krishna, who in this sense is the ultimate high-hanging fruit, the ultimate abstract principle, the highest principle you can live your life according to. And just like somebody who lives according to purity or veganism or chastity, these are very high ideals. And some people, they can really own them. Some people, this just becomes who they are. They never fall down. They never give up. It's real for them because they can leap higher. They can grab others. It's like they have an option. It's like most people, you go to a basketball court, you look at that rim, you're never going to touch that rim. Who can dunk in this room? Exactly. But every once in a while you meet people who are tall enough and they have enough of a vertical leap where they can dunk. And for them, that rim is within grasp. That's an option. They can touch that rim. They increase their vertical leap. They increase the height they can jump. And they're tall. And that combination means that for us, what we could never do, they can leap up and they can dunk. It's like, wow, look at that. We can all do that. We can all leap up and grab a hold of Krishna. But it depends on learning these lessons well and doing this stuff well. But not merely doing this stuff, doing this with a view towards, I'm giving up materialism. I'm giving up having too many expectations. I'm giving up being too addicted to temporary pleasures. I'm being stoic. I'm being detached. I'm cultivating depth. I'm cultivating purity. Not just for its own sake, but because I've got my eye on the prize. And I'm leaping regularly. Every day you chant japa, you're leaping up. Every day you do kirtan, you're leaping up. You're developing that vertical leap. You're growing taller. Until eventually you're untethered enough to the world where you can float on the world. And you can leap up high and you can grab a hold of that higher truth. And Krishna nicely articulates both these points. The non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, their disappearance in due course, are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer. They arise from sense perception, and you have to learn to tolerate them. The world doesn't have it out for you when it's winter, and it's not blessing you when it's summer. The world's just doing its thing. It's not all about you. Don't take it so personally. Don't get so wrapped up in it. And the person who's not disturbed by happiness and distress and is steady in both, that person's eligible for liberation. They're light enough on their feet. They're tall enough. They can jump. They can take that plane. They can get on the plane. They've got that ticket. They can dunk. And so as we're following our rules and regulations and trying to be pious and trying to live a higher life, we shouldn't forget that this is going to empower us. And it's going to force multiply, exponentially increase our ability to leap up out of this world in our meditation, in our hearts, throughout the course of our life, and grab Krishna. And let's practice that right now. So, Kirtan, thank you very much. Hare Krishna.